Over the 150 years of deep water fishing from the Humber, there's always been a strong rivalry between the yellow bellies of Grimsby and the Yorkshire tykes of Hull.
This is where it all began. Just another fishing boat from Humberside, putting out in the early morning to conduct its business in great waters. Same sea, same sky, and both equally unpredictable, that have seen generations of hunters from Humberside putting out to take the harvest of the sea.
Until the mid-1800s, fishing from the Humber and East Coast ports was largely restricted to the local longlinesmen, operating small boats in coastal waters. That was until the arrival of fishing smacks from Brixham and Ramsgate, who had fished the Dogger Bank, which lies out into the North Sea some scores of miles off the Yorkshire coast. There are a number of stories to explain the discovery of the Dogger Bank fishing grounds. Some say it was pure chance after the southern trawlers had been blown north in bad weather, and others say it was a result of systematic exploration.
Whatever, one or two boats, it seems, landed spectacular catches of, amongst other fish, sole, and they sold them to the posh people of this up-and-coming seaside town of Scarborough. The next summer, they came in even greater numbers, and they fished the Dogger Bank with such success that on their return, the sides of their boats were covered in silver fish scales, and from then on, the North Sea fisheries of the Dogger Bank were known as the Silver Pits.
Until the 1860s, at least as much fish was landed in Scarborough as in either Hull or Grimsby. It was, nevertheless, the beginning of a new way of life for the north and south banks of the Humber. There would be fortunes for a few, and hard, poorly paid work for thousands.
Originally, the smacksmen who came up from Brixham and Lowestoft just moored out in the Humber during the summer. But then they were persuaded by both Hull and Grimsby to stay for the year round. And that was the making of the local fishing industry. That, plus the railways. They reached Hull first. Then, not to be outdone, the Sheffield and Lincolnshire Railway came to Grimsby. And that was the making of both ports, because it allowed the development of the commercial docks, and it also allowed the building up of the fishing industry, because it coincided with the ability to make ice locally. So the fish could be unloaded here, they could be sold there, they could be put on trains and sent out immediately to the mass consumer markets of the industrial north. They could even get to London, to Billingsgate, much quicker than they ever could going round by ship.
This is the William McCann, the last surviving example of the deep water sailing trawlers operating out of Hull and Grimsby towards the end of the 19th century. Today she earns her living from pleasure cruises out of England and France, but in her heyday she would have been home to a crew of 6 or 7, often at sea for months on end.
Originally, fishermen stuck pretty close together for both safety and productivity reasons. They could unload all the fish onto one small boat and send it back in again. But what really drove the industry in both Hull and Grimsby here was exploration. By the mid-19th century, they'd explored Icelandic waters. By the end, Spitsbergen, Bear Island, Greenland, Russian waters. So the great-grandfathers of today's Grimsby fishermen were really explorers. And they were driven by the dream of wealth, the dream of owning their own boat, eventually even owning their own fleet. Fishing did create a lot of wealth. It also threw up millionaires, both 3-day ones and millionaires for life. But that wealth was often built on cheap labour, more often than not recruited from orphanages, workhouses, even prisons. Although the so-called casual labourers were indispensable, the conditions were so unspeakably bad that the law sometimes had to be used to force them to go to sea. If a crew member refused, prison could be, often was, the punishment.
In the fierce competition for success, there was no time for the niceties of owner-employee relationships, and little thought was given to the crew's comfort or safety on board ship. The industrialisation of fishing began perhaps 50 years later than in other industries, but the exploitation of the workforce was nonetheless for that. At the turn of the century, the accident and death rate among fishing crews was not even rivalled by the notorious mining industry.
But with the trawler owners, their power and influence seemed to begin almost as soon as they came into being.
Britannia has always ruled the waves. Trawlers fished the seas of rival navies, and as such, their uses sometimes went beyond simply hauling in the catch. As Othello says in Shakespeare's play, they have done the state some service. There were some who suspected the senior service of interfering in the Dogger Bank. The beginning of the 20th century was the age of the dreadnought. One of the great sea powers was Imperial Russia. In 1904, she went to war with new modernized Japan. The Russian fleet was sailing from the Baltic through the North Sea around the world to engage the Japanese Navy, when lookouts spotted what they thought were Japanese torpedo boats, and within minutes 300 shells had been fired at the unarmed steam trawlers making up the Gamecock fleet from Hull and Grimsby. This was the scene after the trawlers had limped back to St Andrew's Dock in Hull, where many a gruesome tale was told of how one trawler was sunk and skipper George Smith and third-hand William Leggett had their heads blown off. 6 other men were badly injured.
This plaque commemorates the men who were killed in what was at the time called the Russian outrage. But even today, there are a few unanswered questions. Why was the fishing fleet fishing some miles east of its usual position, directly in the path of a naval fleet already on full war alert? Regardless, the British Empire almost went to war with Russia over the incident. And Russia was only able to placate the British Empire by offering her a free hand in Afghanistan and in Persia. Directly as a result of this, the Russian fleet was destroyed by the Japanese in 1905. Russia was no longer a naval threat.
Despite these setbacks, fishing in both Hull and Grimsby enjoyed its best years in this period. The cod, the haddock, the sole were plentiful, and both ports busied themselves building new fleets of coal and oil-burning steam trawlers to go faster, further, and for longer, and in all kinds of weather. Once on the fishing grounds, it was an 18-hour day, often in appalling conditions, with the deck rolling, with ice, with snow, with wind, and of course the fishermen had to buy their own protective clothing, their own heavy boots, their own bedding, their own mattresses. Take up your bed and fish, because it could all be bought at the company store. The companies had various other activities, such as wholesaling fish and fish meat, ice making, engineering supplies, all gradually being monopolised by the trawler owner companies.
Getting the fish to market at the most opportune moment was always the priority. In pursuit of this goal, the skipper could and often did behave like a seagoing baron, treating his crew in a manner that even feudal serfs would have found hard to endure. But the trawlers and their crews had other uses. When World War I came around, the trawlers were commandeered and refitted to sweep mines and undertake escort duties. Their peacetime crews gallantly and patriotically volunteered to man them.
The wartime sacrifices of both Grimsby and Hull were enormous. 9,000 men, 800 fishing vessels served out of the two ports during the war, and 30% of them were destroyed. In fact, when Admiral Beatty came to Grimsby after the war, the banner that was put right across Freeman Street here said, "The Navy saved the nation, and the fishermen saved the Navy," and it was right.
During the 1920s and 30s, trawlers from the two towns steamed as a matter of course all around Iceland, the White Sea, Russia, northern Norway, and as far as Greenland. They steamed in all weathers and in all seasons, and the casualty rate did not lessen.
The new fish docks in Grimsby were opened in 1934 when Consolidated Fisheries' latest trawler, the Grimsby Town, broke the ribbon and entered the dock. For Grimsby, it was the biggest event of the decade, but things were already starting to go wrong. In the interwar period, the British fishermen, particularly those from Hull and Grimsby, openly poached the waters around Iceland and Norway, returning with full holds of fish which had bred unhindered during the war years. But by now, those countries had their own trawling fleets. Gradually, international agreements pushed British trawlers out of the coastal waters, further out to sea. In the 1930s, for the first but certainly not the last time, Hull and Grimsby trawlermen found themselves looking down the barrels of foreign fishery protection guns. The response of the British fishermen was to restrict poaching to the sort of weather conditions that would have had the gunboats running for shelter. It cost many a fisherman his life as owners and skippers said, "Damn to the weather, fish, fish, fish." Before long, the abundance of fish turned to scarcity as other countries, particularly the French, overtook Britain as fishing leaders. It was a hard life with a basic wage of around £2 and a share of oil money from the cod livers. If the catch was poor, a trawlerman could actually be in debt as a result of his 3 weeks' work. Even if the catch was good, there was always the risk of the merchants declaring it suitable only for fish milling at knockdown prices. It was a system that often produced suspicions of abuse because round the corner it could get sold at prime prices. But the trawler owners and the middlemen dictated the terms, and the men and women of Hessel Road in Hull and Hope Street in Grimsby survived as best they could.
In the dark years of 1936, 37 and 38, trawlers lay rusting at their moorings. But then in 1939, the Admiralty once more called upon the services of the fishermen. Once again, Hull and Grimsby trawler fleets did the state some service. Once again, crews and fleets were decimated by enemy action. The war losses were replaced with the help of government funds. It was a boom period for trawler building, and the yards at Beverley and Selby worked to full capacity.
Then we had a big glut of fish about 1940, 46, 47. Huge glut of fish, and prices dropped. They couldn't sell the fish. Fish was going to manure. We wasn't. You had to pay expenses, and you had your ship's expenses before you got anything, and we weren't covering expenses. I mean, I come on one trip, and I think I owed £4.10, you know, to the firm for going to sea. Yeah. Well, not only me, there was dozens of them. There's all the ships in the same boat, you know. There was that much fish on the market. Hell of a glut. Loads of fish. Bear Island had just opened up after the war. Greenland, all these places. There was just so much fish to be caught, you know, and so many ships to catch it. With a fleet in Hull then, about 180 ships in Hull.
There were good skippers and there were bad skippers. Two of the best were Bill Drever and his son Charles. They're seen here in 1956 as they ease out of St Andrew's Dock on their way to the White Sea. At the helm of the Bay Ella is Charles, closely followed by his father in the pride of Mars fleet, the recently launched Marbella. Bill Drever worked, rested, ate, and probably slept in his Homburg hat. He had at least three: his fishing hat, covered in seagull droppings, his coming home hat, and his £10,000 hat, worn only when landing very profitable catches. Bill was one of the best, but not every crew was so lucky.
He wanted to stay home for Christmas with us, and he was going to have Christmas home, and the gaffer said to him, just do me a favour and go away for Christmas, then you can go to school for your cheese ticket. And he never made it. He was going down to the White Sea or Bear Island, wherever it was, and the skipper was a little bit inebriated. And he said, I'll take her in so as we can have a comfortable dinner. He turned in market, and the next thing, she went over a reef and broke her back. And poor old Dennis, he didn't get lost. They got him aboard the boat, but he'd swallowed that much oil and crap. He never made it. He wasn't the only one. There was the wireless operator, was it? And Terry Day.
Terry Day, yeah.
He was mate. He got lost in it. He died. Oh, it was terrible, terrible. People just couldn't take it for a long, long while. I mean, Dennis was noted and, you know, really liked all of it.
Right,
Was
good
Dennis.
shipmate, wasn't he?
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Everybody liked Dennis.
Right. It was accepted, wasn't it, by the community?
Among the community, it was just accepted thing, but you know, when it was somebody...
Like a gamble, you went out there and didn't know he was coming back, and that was it.
Yeah.
You just accepted it.
Well, all my family had been fishing, and that's all there was to do. Just followed my father's, my grandfather's and great-grandfather's footsteps. We used to work the same hours as the crew, 18 on, 6 off. That was at 15. First trip I did, we made 3,900 and I picked up £9. And I thought I was never going to be poor again.
Once you've got the bobbins out, the smaller bobbins in on the trawl, you had to start pulling the net in by hand, all the lads right along the rail. You have to lean over on the roll, drag it in as you're going. And at that particular time, the sea come over. It was 10 foot above the head. It washed us all about. All the lads was all swilling about the decks, and some had hung on. Some had got under the bridge, where you could get a grab hold on, and let it drain itself away. But this particular time I went over, and I'd still have my hands in the net. And then the next thing I knew, I'm back again, on the deck. It'd gone over, next roll, in, and then the next roll again, over again. But it happens that fast, and that's what happened. I went over. It wasn't frightening. It was worrying I might have lost my boats. It's funny. Worrying about losing my sea boats because it bloody cost a fortune.
It was terrible, really. But we just accepted that. We must have been crazy. It was a crazy breed of people in those days.
It's appropriate there's a gate here because this was once the frontier between two worlds. Out there, the normal world of Grimsby, normal as it ever could be with the fishing industry. In there, the men's world, down dock, where fortunes were made, where the huge, powerful interests that dominated the industry clashed and conflicted. There were the owners running the port like a mafia, the skippers all competing against each other, the merchants making the money, and the fishermen, the poor bloody infantry of the whole business, walking tall when they came out because they were 3-day millionaires out in the town.
It was a crazy life. You know, when you think back, it was absolutely crazy. It was. When I think back, we must have been mad, definitely. You used to come in dock, maybe at the maximum in those days, you were 60 hours in the dock, and then he was away again. I mean, 60 hours is nothing, is it, after 3 weeks? And that's why they used to call us these millionaires. It wasn't the amount of money you was getting, it was in such a short time you was spending it like. You were spending a normal man's 3 weeks' money in 2.5 days. And that's why they all thought was getting tons and tons of money, which he wasn't actually.
Well, how much were you getting? Can you remember?
Not very much at all. I've actually done a trip to sea and had caught a lot of fish, a big trip, and come in the dock and been in debt. Had nothing to come. Because the fish hadn't sold, like. There was that much fish on the market, and the market was down and haven't sold the fish. So got to the office, like, no money to come. Actually in debt, after 3 weeks at sea. And then he used to go back again, in the same day, in the same ship, like. So is that madness or what?
Fishing has always been a hard, competitive industry on all sides. The owners had to be ruthless to survive. But there was never a shortage of willing crews, and conditions on board ship were improving. In 1962, the world's first whole-catch freezer trawler, the Junella, joined Ma's fleet. For the old hands on board, it must have seemed like a floating hotel. But once on the fishing grounds, life could be as tough as ever.
Once I was a schoolboy who stayed at home at ease. Now I am a smacksman and I plows the raging seas. I thought I'd like seafaring mind, but very soon I found it was not all plain sailing, boys. out on the fishing ground. So coil away the trawl rope, boys, let's heave on the trawl. When we get our fish on board, we'll have another haul. Straightway to the capstan, we'll merrily heave it around. For that's the cry in the middle of the night, haul the trawl, boys, haul. Every night in winter, as regular as the clock, we put on our sou'westers, likewise our oilskin smocks. Eastwards round to westwards, we'd merrily heave it away. For that's the cry in the middle of the night, as well as in the day. So coil away the trawl rope, boys, let's heave on the trawl. When we get our fish on board, we have another haul. Straightway to the capstan, we'll merrily heave it around. For that's the cry in the middle of the night, haul the trawl, boys, haul. And when we get our fish on board, we have them all to go. We put them into boxes and down the ice like a boat. We ice them and we size them, we ice them all quite well. Yes, we ice them and keep them safely like an oyster in its shell. So coil away the trawl rope, boys, let's heave on the trawl. When we get our fish on board, we'll have another haul. Straightway to the capstan, we'll merrily heave it around. For that's the cry in the middle of the night, haul the trawl, boys, haul.
Despite the advances of technology, much still depended on the skill of the skipper.
When you were at sea, you were a skipper, you know, and that was it. And you know, if you didn't fish in bad weather, and if you didn't catch a trip, you was out. You was only as good as your last trip. You was out. There was no messing about. Trawler owners walk down the dock and sack the loss here. All hands, skipper as well.
Sure that happened.
Oh, regular, yeah. And the same thing with the skipper. He'd sack up, no problem. If he'd had the slightest trouble, he'd sack all hands.
Successful skippers have always been much sought after. Few were more successful than Bill Brettle and Roy Waller, as they took it in turn to win the Silver Cod, awarded for landing the best annual catch.
A, you needed a good ship. B, you needed a good crew, because if you caught the fish, you caught a lot of fish. They had to get stuck in and put it away, put it below. You could be fishing, two vessels fishing together, both catching the same amount of fish. You know, so you're both on heavy fishing. With a good crew, you'd put 500, 600, 700 kiss away one day. With a poor crew, you're down to 200, 300 kiss. Well, you've been fishing a week, it makes a big difference.
Well, I used to go for the ice. Just to steam north till I met the ice and try and get behind the ice. Because from April, when it's moving back, my theory was that the ice was melting, which it was, and all the plankton that was trapped in the ice used to be coming down. You could see it. When you got into the ice, you could see all the cloudy water, and I think the fish was feeding on it, you know.
Which it was,
yeah. You get tight up alongside the ice, you'd get fish. Sometimes you wouldn't, most times you would. If you got 50 yards off it, you get nothing. So the idea was to try and get behind it, or tight up to it when it was moving back, and then the fish was being exposed.
Yeah. Wasn't it dangerous to sail into the ice?
Well, I had to go to insurance a few times, because he used to put dints in the stem, and the insurance had the power to stop you going to sea. You know, like a sentence. And the trawler owner said to me, well, I'm paying the damage, and he wouldn't let the insurance company disciplined me, and he also put a concrete bow in the ship. Lined all the stem with concrete for the simple reason of knocking ice about. And I used to get a lot of fish that way.
Some vessels was better than others in bad weather. Some could would go through the weather, some could handle it better in the weather, and some were beautiful sea ships, you know, they would ride seas, and some was atrocious ships, you know, take more water than that. No.
So the Grimsby skippers was quite rough, weren't they? Over there used to fish some weather at that. North Cape, Iceland.
Yeah.
Don Lister and company. Just to admit it, they never laid. I don't think I ever put any men's lives at risk myself. And I wasn't one for fishing in bad weather, really.
The Silver Cod Trophy was a brilliant public relations exercise to improve the image of a British fishing industry much tarnished by charges of bribery and corruption.
The guy Ted behind the bar shouted out, "Ian, it's for you. It's the runner from Boydland." So I goes, picks the phone up. "Get your ass down here, Bailey, and sign on this ship." I said, "Oh, change of heart, have you?" He said, "I will have if you don't come down and sign on now." So I put the phone down, says to the lads, I'm in, you know, they're signing me on. So I run out of the club, and there was a railway bridge at the bottom of Liverpool Street which took you to the Cross Market, the fish shop. I was walking across there, and the mate of the ship was walking towards me. He turned around and said, "Are you up your worth the £10 I've just paid for you?" I said, "Is that what it cost you?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "It was either you or I had to settle for an older man." He says, "And I didn't want this particular person." So he said, "So just make sure you're worth the tenner." I think he got about 8 trips out of me. So he didn't do bad, did he, for the tenner? But it went on.
They never admitted that it went on.
Oh, no, they won't do, will they? You know, it's just, I think they'll say it was just part of the looking after each other sort of thing, you know. You know, it went on in every firm.
Post-war prosperity was unfortunately short-lived. For the fishing industry, the writing was on the wall. Increasingly frustrated by new restrictions on their activities, many owners, not surprisingly, became more reluctant to reinvest as heavily as before, and profits were redirected into other areas, most notably property, land, and farming. After that were the years of dreadful losses.
The seas got that big, you could see them coming towards you. It was just like a block of flats. I've never experienced anything like it in my life. It was like a big block of flats coming up towards you, and what we was having to do was ring the ship on to climb up them, and then when you got on top of them, you was slowing your ship down to climb down. And it was getting that far and far off. You could smell it. And then it started icing up. We all started clearing the boat deck first with axes and anything you could get just to chop the ice away and let it go. But the ship was still going over to starboard with the list. We thought we was going to get saved at the time. We saw these lights coming, and we didn't know what it was. We just thought, well, we're going to get saved. So we let our life rockets go, shut them off, and maybe about half an hour later we saw the same again from the ship. So that's the last we saw that. We got congregated on the bridge and thought whether to get into life raft or try and turn the ship round. So we decided to turn the ship round instead of getting the life raft. Anyway, the skipper was on the bridge, we all the officers, and we turned the ship round, rung the ship on full, waited while we got over one of these big seas, rung the ship on full, and as we went round, the ship just took one of the seas and it just covered us with water. So we thought we was going to go then, but with it being an old-fashioned trawler, we've got old-fashioned trawlers, she managed to pull out the water and away we went.
Icing. It was the fisherman's worst nightmare. Icing was dreaded by fishermen.
In 150 years of fishing, it claimed many a Hull and Grimsby trawler. There was the Lorella and the Rodrigo, to name only two desperately tragic accidents. And then, in 1968, in some of the worst weather for a century, the Kingston Peridot and the Ross Cleveland left here St Andrew's Dock with their crews, never to return. Now there's a saying, cometh the moment, cometh the man. In this case it was a woman, Big Lil Belocca.
Now what attitude are you going to take when you go down to London tomorrow?
I don't know, but if I'm not satisfied it will be drastic.
But what can be done?
Lots of things can be done, Petal, and will be done. We need an independent signalling system on every ship.
Big Lil's campaign for new safety measures, after initial successes, went largely unheeded. She met prejudice, organised opposition, but worst of all, lack of solidarity and apathy from the men she hoped to protect. And then the industry sailed into major international problems.
This is the big one, the one that really matters. Sleek and yellow, 15 pounds of flesh and bone and sinewy muscle, bearded like a sage. King Cod, monarch of the North Atlantic. He lives in the deeps, but he breeds in the shallow coastal waters of the countries that rim the North Atlantic. Here the young codlings are born to grow fat on phytoplankton. In these rich waters, every mouthful is a banquet. The continental shelf of Iceland, a natural prolongation of the country itself, is both their feast and their fastness. Yet even here, scientists now realize the cod could be doomed. Today, the North Atlantic cod is a target of modern industrial mechanization on a scale never known before. In science laboratories all over the world, the life of the sea is kept under constant watch. Icelandic scientists in particular are concentrating on the fate of the cod, for Iceland's welfare is closely associated with that of the cod. The seawater is analyzed to learn more about the cod's living conditions, or rather his dying conditions. Because despite the strict rules that are being imposed on Icelandic fishermen, the scientists are growing more and more concerned. The life cycle of the cod is visibly shortening. A few years ago, the life expectancy of the North Atlantic cod was around 15 years.
Today, on the other hand, fishing mortality is so high that hardly any fish live long enough to reach that age. The fishery is based on younger and younger fish, thus seriously threatening the spawning potential of the stock. This is actually true for the whole of the North Atlantic, but it is especially true for the Icelandic cod, which suffer higher fishing mortality than any other cod stock in the North Atlantic. Scientists now agree that in order to prevent the fisheries from collapsing, immediate and effective steps must be taken to conserve and to protect these vitally important natural resources of the sea. The sea is a hard and often dangerous profession. It creates a race of hard and rugged men who for centuries have seen it as their personal domain. In their unremitting struggle with the elements in pursuit of their livelihood, they brook no interference, however well-intentioned. In the interests of everyone's future, Iceland decided that she must extend her fishery limits to 50 miles to extend protection to the fish. The new limits cover most of Iceland's continental shelf. Thereby both necessity and justice are served, according to Iceland's foreign minister, Mr. Einar Augustsson.
The right of a coastal state to utilize the resources of the continental shelf, such as oil and shellfish, is recognized by international law, and many states are utilizing such resources well beyond the 50-mile limit. We think it therefore only fair that we should have the right to conserve, control, and rationally utilize our only resource, the fisheries, up to the same distance.
The Cold War was at its height, and Iceland was thinking of renegotiating the terms on which the United States of America leased its base at Keflavik. Iceland's government was finely balanced between socialists and communists, and any slip in Icelandic living standards, and they depended on fish, and the communists might gain power and hand this crucially important base to the Soviets. But Britain's initial reaction to Iceland's declaration of an extension of fish limits was to fight.
I got rammed by the Arbecker in the Bavaria, smashed all my bridge in. So I rammed him, rung around full. The Irishman rammed him up the stern, and I rammed him on the stem. It looked like he'd had in slippery. He had to go in dry dock for 6 weeks. We just covered all the side of the bridge up, what was all smashed in with tarpaulins. Steamed 300 miles to the north and caught a trip. And not a bad trip either. Nothing was said when I docked. Never even had to go to the insurance.
A compromise quota system offered by the Icelandics was rejected.
The thing was, they tried, our gunboats was there, and they tried to keep us in such a small area where it was impossible to make a living. Would have been better off on the labour, you know. So I went off this particular time, and the gunboat quarters, like, the Icelandic gunboat quarters, and they fired at us and all that business. Wanted us, all he wanted us to do was get aboard and take us in, like. But they was not doing the job, weren't they? And in actual fact, they was doing a good job for their country, definitely.
What did you do?
Well, nothing really. I mean, we just refused them aboard, and we just carried on. We were steaming. We turned round like and was steamed back to get towards our gunboats. We were steaming that way. Our gunboat was steaming this way, like, and we just never stopped.
You make it sound like a picnic. It wasn't that.
It wasn't a picnic.
You were scared stiff, weren't you?
Well, I wasn't actually scared stiff, but I wasn't very happy. I mean, the one thing, he was firing solid shot, you know, I mean, it wasn't explosive, but he threatened to put one through the bridge and all that business, you know. But I think he was just trying to frighten us to heave to, and then he would have been aboard us and he'd have whipped us in.
The loss of traditional fishing grounds off Iceland destroyed confidence in the future of the industry, just as the advent of the larger stern trawlers improved efficiency, safety and comfort for the long-suffering crews. One of the new breed of trawler was the Gaul. The controversy surrounding her disappearance in appalling weather conditions north of Norway continues to this day.
I wrote to the Russian papers, Pravda, and I had 2 or 3 Russians letters from different people, you know, different Russians. But one Russian has said that the Russians have got the goal. But he said he can't say too much because he's been, what they called it, his back broken and his legs broken. He said he didn't say too much. Yeah, and he is American. He's born American and he's trying to get out of Russia. But he said when he gets out of Russia, he'll come to me and he'll tell me all about the goal.
I was there, or at least I was in Tromsø when she disappeared that particular night. And the weather was very, 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 very bad. I mean, ships have got lost in bad weather, but I personally have never believed that she went down, ever.
What do you think might have happened?
Well, there was a NATO manoeuvres going on at the time. There was several countries' ships. If, as lots of people think, she may have been rammed by a submarine, something like that, and they're trying to hide it up. I don't know. I personally don't think she's on the floor. I think she was captured.
We located the goal within a very short time of it being sunk and identified it as such, but personally I haven't had the goal. I have exactly the counts and I've avoided it. I've seen it on the sounder, but I've not had it.
but the Norwegians have had it and reported it as the goal.
It was a sad end to the distant water trawling industry. Cod wars, loss of Icelandic waters in 1976, contraction in Norwegian waters, loss of Russian waters, and then came the common market, the economic community they called it. The owners had never bothered about it because they were fishing in Iceland, but with it we lost the exclusive control of our own fishing grounds. We couldn't build up the fishing industry within our own 200-mile limits as everybody else was doing. So the distant water industry was just scrapped. The men were thrown on the scrap heap, the owners collected huge sums in compensation, the men got nothing.
There was no justice to it. Men who'd given their lives to the industry, who'd been treated almost like chattels, were told that they were casual workers, not worthy of compensation. Men who'd served the nation in war, men who'd endured the rigours of Icelandic and Russian waters, suddenly found themselves thrown on the scrap heap, neglected, rejected. Now, all they have is their memories.
With the death of the industry, so the fishing communities along Hessel Road and Hope Street died too. The lock gates of St Andrew's Dock will never again tremble to the sounds of the steam and diesel engines of the past, and the crowds who gather there every year to mourn the deaths of their friends, their brothers and their husbands might also be mourning the death of an industry.
This is the end of the long, sad story. All that's left of Grimsby's once proud, distant water fishing industry is here, in a museum. Like so much of Britain's industrial heritage, we've preserved it in the Fishing Heritage Centre, with the Ross Tiger moored alongside, no longer fishing, but at least it's showing a generation of school kids to come what it was like in those hard, bitter days.
But even in death throes, the rivalry between Hull and Grimsby continues. In Hull, there is talk of the old Lord Line buildings being converted into a fishing museum, and in response to the Ross Tiger, there is the Arctic Cavalier. But not all of the two Trawler Towns fishing industry has been consigned to museums. What remains of deep water fishing operates in a market dictated by grants, subsidies, quotas and restrictions. There's still fish being landed in both ports, but it's more often than not fish caught by foreign trawlers.
Most of the brave old trawlers have been sold for scrap. A few have been sold to African countries, to Asia, Australia, New Zealand. And these old sidewinders in Grimsby dock will survive just for a few more years. Once proud vessels, being converted now to accommodation ships for the offshore gas and oil industry.
With the demise of fishing came redundancy for trawlermen. Their true status went unrecognised because of a legal loophole that described the men who built the industry as casual workers.
But there have never been any casual workers in the fishing industry. Not with management ashore, nor with skipper and deckhand at sea. It's always been a skilled, hard-working survival of the fittest. Now we in Hull, we can perhaps say that we've fared better, because at least we have two companies still working, Mars and Boyd Line. But in financial and business terms, one could say that life must be as hard now for them as it was for the fishermen of the past. But hope springs eternal in the human heart. There are some optimists who are rediscovering that small is beautiful.
But when all said and done, the industry isn't about money. It isn't about romance or fish. It's about people. It's about men and the wives who endured them.
There's one thing, like I said, my husband had been dead a few years, but at least I married a man. He was real tough a man, but he was kind and he was generous. He was a man, and you've got to be a man to go out there. And I've never regretted one day I was married to him. I was married almost 40 years.
How still lies the bay in the light western airs that blow from the crimson horizon. Once more we tack home with a dry empty hold, saving gas in the breezes so fair. She's a kindly Cape Islander, old but still sound, but so lost in the long line of shadow. Make and break and make do, for the fish are so few that she won't be replaced should she founder. Make and break, but the boats are so few, too many are pulled up and rotten. Most houses stand empty, old nets hung to dry, are blown away, lost and forgotten. I can see the big draggers has stirred up the bay, leaving lobster pots smashed on the bottom. Do they think it don't pay to respect the old ways that make and break men have not forgotten? For we still take our time from the turn of the tides, and this boat that I built with my father still lifts to the skies one longer, and I still talk like old friends on the water. In make and break harbour the boats are so few, too many are pulled up and rotten. Most houses stand empty, old nets hung to dry are blown away, lost and forgotten. In make and break harbour the boats are so few, too many are pulled up and rotten. Most houses stand empty, old nets hung to dry are blown away, lost and forgotten.